President Obama's health care reform law. The Supreme Court began the first of 3 days of historic hearings on the controversial law. And Tom, this case is getting incredible attention all across the country.
All across the world, Susie, and a key issue here in the United States before this court is whether Congress has the right under the U.S. Constitution to require all Americans to buy health insurance, whether or not they want it. Almost 50 million Americans do not have health insurance, according to the latest statistics. 26 states are challenging the law's requirement. In today's opening arguments, lawyers made a case the insurance mandate doesn't take effect until 2014, arguing the high court should not rule until then.
Now, the court's final decision could have far-reaching implications for the economy and many businesses, as well as you. Darren Gersh was at the Supreme Court and filed this report.
Even for the Supreme Court, today was historic. Outside, protesters for and against testified to the importance of this case. But inside, the court began with a narrow legal question. To avoid frivolous lawsuits from interfering with the government's ability to raise revenues, the law requires taxpayers to first pay a tax before fighting it in court. Since the individual insurance mandate doesn't take effect for 2 years, lawyer Robert Long told the justices they should wait to decide this issue. They could take it up after someone pays a fine and sues the government, claiming it's unconstitutional.
There is no reason to think that Congress made a special exception for the penalty imposed.
But Justice Antonin Scalia said any limits on a court's ability to consider a case like this should be narrow and clear.
I find it hard to think that this is clear, whatever else it is. It's easy to think that it's not clear.
The debate today hinged on whether Congress is taxing people who do not buy health insurance or whether Congress is slapping a penalty on people without health insurance. If it's a penalty, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg argued there was no legal reason the court could not decide this case now.
This is not a revenue-raising measure because if it's successful, nobody will pay the penalty and there will be no revenue to raise.
But Chief Justice John Roberts said the point of the lawsuits challenging the president's health care law is to prevent the collection of taxes, an issue tied directly to the mandate to buy health insurance.
A mandate is a command. Now, if there's nothing behind the command, sort of, well, what happens if you don't follow the mandate? And the answer is nothing. It seems very artificial to separate the punishment from the crime.
In an odd legal twist, the Obama administration agrees with those suing it that there's no reason for the Supreme Court to wait to rule on the merits of the individual mandate, though at times even Solicitor General Donald Verrilli seemed to trip up over penalties and taxes, as he did here with Justice Stephen Breyer.
If they've paid the tax, then they're in compliance with the law.
Why do you keep saying tax?
If they pay the tax penalty, they're in compliance with the law. Thank you, Justice Breyer.
Tax penalty. Darren Gersh here joining us now from Washington, D.C. Bureau will point out, of course, microphones allowed in the high court, but, of course, no video cameras. Darren, does this all boil down to an argument over a tax which is used to fund a government versus what you want to call a penalty, which would be an economic punishment?
It does, because they want to make sure that basically, you know, if you're unhappy with your taxes, you're not going to sue the Supreme Court. You're not going to end up in the Supreme Court. So this is their way to kind of narrow the exemption to this law that is designed to protect our tax system.
So we can call it a penalty here. And if we do that, does the court seem inclined with what you heard today to rule that they don't have to wait until 2014 to decide the fate?
This is their March Madness. I really thought that they're going for it. They really seem to think that, and this is the kind of case, if you're a justice, you live for it. It's got everything. It's a huge constitutional issue. It's a national issue that needs to be resolved. So I think they're trying to clear out the kind of technical underbrush, but they look like they're going to go for it by late June. We'll have a decision.
Okay, so assuming they do, why is today's focus so important on the technicalities here, tax versus penalty?
Well, I mean, this is really gets to the heart of this kind of abstract. It's called the Anti-Injunction Act. It is important because it keeps people from suing before they pay a tax, gaming the system. They had to get to this. And so it also determines whether or not the court can take the issue. And as you know, you get 9 lawyers in a room. The first thing they're going to argue is whether they have authority to do something.
Well, what role about economics could play as we hear more arguments tomorrow and Wednesday?
Yeah, economics will be important. I mean, you've got the government's going to argue, like, look, we need the individual mandate because it prevents cost shifting. Cost shifting, excuse me, is a critical issue, and that's the reason Congress wanted to do this. And the cost shifting gets to the whole issue of why Congress is regulating, which has to do with interstate commerce and the whole sort of underpinning of why Congress could act to do the economic regulation. But if they pull out the individual mandate, then the economic case becomes more difficult. And also, the justice will have to decide whether the rest of the law makes economic sense, whether it could survive without the mandate. So that'll be critical.
Watching and listening to those arguments at the Supreme Court this week from Washington tonight, our Bureau Chief Darren Gersh.
So what will the Supreme Court ruling mean for big healthcare providers? To answer that, we turn to the head of one of the nation's biggest medical institutions, the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Toby Cosgrove. Toby, nice to have you back on the program.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
So what outcome would you like to see coming out of the Supreme Court from the perspective of the healthcare system?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we have rules so we can make do our planning for the future. But what we really need is we need to change our healthcare delivery system. We currently have a fragmented system with variable quality and it's high cost, and we have to assure quality and increase the quality, and we have to decrease the cost.
And where's that cost cutting going to come from? No matter what happens in the Supreme Court, we still have to deal with this healthcare economic problem. Where's the cost cutting going to come from?
Well, we have to do two things. We have to have an integrated delivery system, which will be coordinated and efficient. And the second thing is we have to move away from fee-for-service and start paying doctors and healthcare providers for value. And that's a big shift. And those two things are very doable as we go forward.
Do you see healthcare organizations? Well, first of all, I know that Cleveland Clinic has done a lot in this area. It's very self-motivated to do that. But in terms of other healthcare organizations, do you see them moving in this direction, or are they just going to go by the bare minimum of what the government and what regulators tell them to do, or are they going to go above and beyond?
Well, I think that one of the interesting things is that I don't think we're going to see a lot of changes from that, regardless of what the Supreme Court decisions are, because the train has already left the station. Healthcare is already beginning to change. We're integrating across the hospitals. We're seeing increasing consolidation of hospitals coming into systems such as we have in Cleveland, and we're seeing cost cutting. We're seeing quality going up. We're seeing all these changes in place, and they're driven by a couple things. First of all, the demographics. We've got a huge number of people now coming into the healthcare system. Some 10,000 more Medicare patients every single day coming into the system, and that's because of the baby boomers and people living longer. And the second thing is the cost is so great that the debt from healthcare is going to overwhelm all the other things that we can do in the United States, education, etc. So we have to make those changes, and we are.
Right. That's a big agenda. A lot of people, 10,000 coming in every day. That's a big agenda. Cleveland Clinic has done a lot in terms of technology, electronic medical records. What do other healthcare organizations have to do to catch up?
Well, I think very importantly is the electronic medical record. We've invested in the last decade $1 billion in IT. 300 million of that is around electronic medical record. So all of our patients are connected by the electronic medical record, and they can have their records at home, so it improves their quality of care and their connections. Secondly, we have got to take costs out. We've done a tremendous amount of that. We've driven up quality. We have to have more teamwork and integration across our system. And I think all healthcare systems are coming to these conclusions at the same time we are. We've been working on this now for 7 years. One of the other things that we have to do is we've got to begin to change from sickness care to health care, and we have to begin to drive wellness. We have to deal with smoking. We have to deal with obesity.
All right, a long list of things to deal with. We thank you so much for coming on the program tonight.
My pleasure.
We've been speaking with Dr. Toby Cosgrove, CEO of the Cleveland Clinic.
Coming up, I'm Suzanne Pratt in New York. Parents are worrying